My own brother fired me.
My own brother fired me in front of the whole board to bury a mistake that cost $347 million. He called it a restructuring. I had watched my father build this company brick by brick for 28 years. 18 of those years I gave to it myself, the last 6 running operations. And there I was, sitting in that conference room, listening to him say my name like he was reading out a sentence. I didn't scream. I didn't stand up. I didn't say a word. Because there was something in my bag he didn't know about. And in 10 days, that same room would decide which one of us walked out of it. But let me take you back a little. That Tuesday, I got to the office at 7:40. I always came in before everyone else. Not to be a hero. It's just that things are clearer in the quiet, and by 9 the plant is calling on 3 lines at once. I got the coffee from the machine on the second floor, the one that goes bitter if it sits too long. I'd been drinking it for so many years that the bitterness stopped bothering me. Without it, the coffee tastes wrong now. I went up, opened my office, laid out the printouts on the tech line contract. I still print everything. Kyle laughs that I'm from the Stone Age. I just like being able to hold the paper and underline things. That day there was a board meeting at 10. Quarterly. Routine. I'd put together the operation summary for it and the numbers were good. Better than we'd done in 2 years. I even caught myself feeling a little proud. Stupid. In this family, the second you're proud of something, you get hit for it. I walked into the conference room with my folder. My father was already at the head of the table. Victor, founder, chairman, 68 years old, straight back, hands folded into a steeple. He nodded at me the way you nod at someone you see every day. My mother sat next to him. Nina, in that gray blazer she wears when she wants to look stricter than she is. 2 people from the investment fund, Gromoff and the woman from out east whose last name I always forget. And Kyle, my brother. 44 years old, perfect shirt, the smile of a man who already knows how the meeting ends. I didn't know yet what he knew. The meeting went the way they always did. Reports, numbers, coffee. I gave my operations update, answered 2 of Gromoff's questions, and he was satisfied. I sat down. And that's when Kyle asked to speak on a separate item. Everyone, he said, and he looked at me, just for a second. But I still remember that second. That's not how you look at your sister. That's how you look at an item on the agenda you need to close. He started talking about a hard quarter, about the tech line contract we lost, about systemic problems in the operations division. The words were smooth, polished, rehearsed. I listened, and at first I didn't even understand he was talking about me, that the division was me, that the systemic problem was me. So I'm proposing the board approve a leadership restructuring. The chief operating officer position, in its current form, is being eliminated. The room went very quiet. My mother looked at the table. Gromoff frowned but said nothing. It was a family matter, and the fund didn't get into family matters. I turned to my father. My father wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his own hands, folded into a steeple, and he said nothing. And that silence hit harder than anything Kyle said. For 28 years I had been my father's girl. He taught me to read a balance sheet when I was 15. And now, while his son was crossing me out of the company I'd carried on my back, my father just studied his fingers. Something inside me went very cold and very calm, not out of courage, out of clarity. I picked up my folder. I stood. I said only, "Fine, I understand." And I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I even held it so it wouldn't bang. The hallway smelled like that same bitter coffee. I stood by the window, looked out at the parking lot, and counted. I wasn't crying. I was counting. 18%, 10 days until the special meeting, and a flash drive that was pushed into my hand by the one person I'd expected it from least. But we'll get to the flash drive. First, I have to go back to where it all started, to the day my father said 4 words to me that I let go right past my ears. To understand why I didn't scream in that conference room, I have to tell you who I was in that company and what that company was to me. My father started Severn when I was 13. I remember him bringing home the first sample, a corrugated cardboard box, an ordinary one, the kind you'd find by the thousand in any warehouse. He set it on the kitchen table like it was something precious. My mother said, "Victor, it's a box." And he said, "It's not a box, it's a beginning." And you know what? He was right. That box grew into a plant with 400 people. I grew up inside that. Other kids went out after school. I went to the plant with my father because the house was empty and he was there. He'd sit me in the corner of his office, hand me an old calculator, and say, "Add up how much we spent on paper this month." I was 15 the first time he showed me a balance sheet. He didn't explain it in some beautiful way. He just pointed at 2 columns and said, "This came in. This went out. If the right side is bigger than the left, we're done." I remembered that for the rest of my life. Kyle, meanwhile, was upstairs in his room. The plant didn't interest him. What interested him was looking like a man who owned a plant. It's a thin difference, but that's the difference that decided everything later. I joined the company officially at 23, right after college. I didn't start in an office. I started on the floor. My father wanted it that way. You want to run people, first go stand next to them at the machine. For 6 months, I walked around in a hard hat and coveralls, counting defects, figuring out why line 2 kept failing every Thursday. Turned out the glue supplier was cutting corners on Fridays, and the batch didn't have time to set. That was me. Not some white collar who came down from above, the girl who knew which machine had which problem. By 35, I was Chief Operating Officer. Not by my last name, by the work. Production, logistics, purchasing, key clients. All of it ran through me. When Metprom threatened to leave for a competitor, I didn't sleep for 3 nights. But I kept the contract. I went to them myself. No slides. Just laid out the numbers and told them where we were cheaper and why. They stayed. They're still with us. Or they were, while I still worked there. I own 18% of the company. My father put it in my name when I turned 30. No occasion, no party. He just called me into his office, set the papers in front of me and said, "Sign. This is yours. You've earned more than anyone." He gave Kyle 22. He was the oldest. He was the son. He was the face. I wasn't hurt back then. 4 percentage points seemed like nothing to me. I didn't understand that on the day everything comes down to a board vote, those points aren't nothing. They're a voice. At home, Andrew and Lisa were waiting for me. Andrew is an engineer. We've been together 20 years, and he's one of those people who doesn't push advice on you. When I'm having a hard time, he doesn't say, "Calm down." And he doesn't say, "I told you so." He asks, "What do you want?" And he waits while I get there myself. Lisa is 15, and she's all me. She counts. She double checks. She doesn't take things on faith. Sometimes I look at her and think, God willing, if she ever has a brother of her own, he turns out better than mine. My mother is her own story. Nina loves me, I don't doubt that. But she loves me sort of over my head, past me. It was always more important to her that I get settled than that I be myself. In her eyes, Kyle could do no wrong. He was a boy. He was the oldest. He smiled the way she liked. And I was too sharp, too into my work, taking on too much. When I married Andrew, she sighed with relief. Not because she was happy for me, because, at least that's handled. And still, That Tuesday, when my father was silent and studying his hands, I wasn't thinking about my mother. I was thinking about him. Because there was one conversation, 6 months before that board meeting, that seemed like nothing to me then, and now wouldn't leave my head. We were standing in his office, late one evening. He was looking out the window at the floor, where they were shutting off the lights, and suddenly he said, without turning around, "Dara, keep every letter." I asked, "Which letters?" He didn't answer. He just said it again, quieter. "Keep all of them." I decided my father was getting old, that it was just an old man's thing. I nodded and forgot. I shouldn't have forgotten. The warning signs didn't start with the contract. They started with little things I waved off at the time. That's how it always goes. First, something small lands. You tell yourself you imagined it. And then you look back and realize they'd been taking you apart for months. The first was the Met Prom presentation. I built it. All the numbers, the logistics, the discount structure I came up with to keep them for another 3 years. Kyle asked for the file, just to look. And a week later, he was showing it to the board, with the words, "I've been working on retaining a key client." I sat there and listened to my brother describe my structure to my father like he'd thought it up over a weekend. I said nothing. I told myself, what does it matter whose name is on the slide? The client stayed. That's what counts. I really thought that. Fool. Then it got worse. Kyle started coming into my operations, not to help, to be present. He'd show up at production meetings, ask questions he didn't know the answers to, and nod like he was testing me. The floor manager, an old guy who'd worked with my father since the 90s, pulled me aside once and asked quietly, "Dara, why is Kyle around so much lately? Is something changing?" I told him no. I didn't know what to tell him myself. And my mother was doing her own work in all this. Every Sunday, dinner at my parents', sacred. And every Sunday, somewhere between the soup and the main course, my mother would slip something in. Not head on, carefully. "Kyle's so tired, the whole company's on him." Or, "Dara, you shouldn't get so far into men's business. Give your brother room." Once she said it straight out. "You're 41 and still running around on the floor. What will people think?" I asked. "What people?" She pressed her lips together and didn't answer. Back then, I still thought it was just my mother's character. I didn't understand it was part of a bigger picture. That they were getting me ready. First, they make you inconvenient in the family. Then they make you unnecessary. And then it showed up. The tech line contract. It was the biggest order in Severn's history. $347 million. A new packaging line for a national retail chain. Deliveries 3 years out, with an option for 2 more. If we landed it and held it, the company moved to another level. I'd run it from the very beginning. The first meetings, the calculations, the bid documents. I knew every number in it because I'd counted every number myself. We made the final round. All that was left was the last negotiation to settle delivery terms and lock the price. And a week before that negotiation, Kyle called me into his office. He sat back, folded his hands, and told me he'd be taking Techline the rest of the way himself. It didn't land at first. "What do you mean yourself?" "Kyle, I've run them for 6 months. I know everything there." "That's exactly why." He smiled. "You're too deep in the details. The final negotiation needs a different level. Strategic. They want to see the top person. They want to see someone who knows the product. That's me." "Dara." He said it softly, almost tenderly, the way you talk to a child who needs to go to bed. "I'm the CEO. I've decided. Hand over all the deal documents to me." I looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something that wasn't hurt. It was dread. Not for myself, for the contract. Because I knew Techline. I knew they had a hard-nosed buyer who could smell weakness from a mile off, and you don't win him with pretty words. You win him with numbers you're sure of. And Kyle didn't know the numbers. Kyle knew how to look the part. I handed over the documents. Every folder, every calculation, every contact. I even wrote out 3 things for him, by hand, on a separate sheet. 3 things you cannot promise that buyer under any circumstances, or we go underwater on margin. 3 points. I underlined them twice. And that evening, I copied those same 3 points to him in an email. A short one, so it would stay in the system. Just a work habit. What you say out loud, put in writing. I didn't think I was saving myself with it. I just always did it that way. 2 weeks later, he came to the board and said we'd lost tech line, and that operations was to blame. But I'll come back to how exactly he did it. Because when I finally saw what happened in that negotiation, that's when my hands really started to shake. After that board meeting where Kyle announced we'd lost tech line, I spent a week not myself. Not because of the accusation. The accusation was vague. Systemic problems in the operations division. Nothing you can grab onto. Something else was eating at me. I couldn't understand how we could have lost them. We made the final round. The price worked. They needed our volume. Nobody else in the region could cover our line. There was only one reason they'd walk. If someone in that final negotiation did something that should never have been done. So I went looking. Officially, I didn't have access anymore. Kyle had taken the deal. But I'd built that operation for years, and half the people in the company had worked with me longer than with him. I didn't hack anything, and I didn't beg anyone for anything. I just asked the floor manager and the women in the contracts department to send me what already passed through their hands anyway. Copies that had my own sign-offs on them, too. These were our shared documents. I had a right to them. And that's when my hands started to shake. I opened the minutes from the final negotiation. Short, a page and a half, kept by Kyle's assistant. And there it was, in black and white, exactly what I'd underlined twice on that handwritten sheet. All 3 points. Kyle had promised the buyer precisely what could not be promised. A delivery deadline we physically couldn't hit without a second shift. A discount that put us underwater on margin. And penalty terms for late delivery that no sane person would sign, knowing our production. The tech line buyer was no fool. He heard a man promising the impossible, and he drew the only logical conclusion: that the company either didn't understand its own production or was lying. And he left. Not over price. Because the person across the table was a well-dressed man who didn't know what he was talking about. I sat over those papers and almost laughed. Because he'd done the exact thing I'd warned him in writing not to do. I'd written it all out for him. By hand. 3 points. And in an email, too. But what came next took the laugh right out of me. A few days after the deal fell through, before that board meeting, Kyle started laying the groundwork. I found it in an email thread the contracts woman forwarded me. I was on the copy line, because I'd always been on the copy line for that project, and they'd simply forgotten to take me off. In a message to my father, copying my mother, Kyle wrote that Tech Line collapsed because the operations division hadn't confirmed production capacity in time, that he, Kyle, had negotiated brilliantly but didn't get the data he needed from operations, and was forced to work blind. It was a lie, built carefully, brick by brick. He'd turned everything upside down. It wasn't that he'd blown the negotiation by promising the impossible. It was that I supposedly hadn't given him the numbers, even though I'd handed him every number, down to the last, plus a handwritten sheet of warnings, which, of course, wasn't in the thread. No paper, so it never happened. I understood then that he hadn't just made a mistake. He'd made a mistake, and then sat down and coldly constructed someone to blame. And the someone was me. I printed all of it. The minutes. The thread, my own old emails, where I'd warned about the timeline risks a month earlier, with dates, with send times. I laid it out on the kitchen table, the same one my father once set that first box on, and I sat over it until 1 in the morning. Andrew came out, saw me in the middle of the papers, said nothing, set a cup of tea down next to me, sat across from me, and only then asked, "What did you find?" He set me up, not in the heat of it, planned. Andrew was quiet for a moment. Then he asked what he always asks. "What do you want?" And this time I didn't say, "I don't know." I looked at the table, at the dates, at the sign-offs, at that handwritten sheet, which thank God I'd photographed back when I handed it over, just out of my habit of logging everything. There was the email, too, sitting on a server with a date nobody could touch. "I want everyone who was in that conference room to see this," I said. "The same people. And I want the numbers to speak for me." I didn't know how yet. There were still weeks until the firing, and longer until the special board meeting. But for the first time since that Tuesday, what I had inside me wasn't cold. It was a plan. Thin as a thread still, but it was there. And 2 days later, my father called me into his office and pushed a flash drive into my hand, without a word. My father handed me the flash drive so quietly I didn't even understand what had happened at first. I'd come into his office to sign a couple of production papers. Routine. The last bit of routine I'd have in that company, as it turned out. He signed, handed them back, and as I was already turning for the door, he took me by the wrist, just for a second, and pressed the flash drive into my palm. Small, black, no label. I opened my mouth, but he gave a small shake of his head. "Not here. Not now." There was something in his eyes I hadn't seen in a very long time. He looked at me the way he had when I was 15, pointing at the 2 columns of a balance sheet, closely. I closed my fist around the drive and walked out. In the car, I couldn't bring myself to look at it for a long time. I sat in the parking lot, the same view out the window, the same bitter coffee smell on my fingers. I was afraid. Because if my father was passing me something in silence, in secret, keeping his eyes off the hallway camera, then whatever was on it would be the kind of thing you can't walk back from. At home, I plugged it into my laptop after Lisa was already asleep. Andrew sat down next to me. There were scans. A lot of them. Financial records on several deals over the last 2 years. Not the cleaned-up version Kyle showed the board. The internal one. The real one. And it showed what I'd suspected but couldn't prove. Kyle hadn't blown something big for the first time, and he hadn't hidden the tracks for the first time. Techline wasn't an accident, it was a pattern. For years, he'd been passing other people's wins off as his own, and quietly pinning his own failures on people below him. It's just that before, the people below were small, the kind who couldn't bite back. This time, he'd reached for me. But that's not what stopped me cold. At the very bottom of one folder there was a separate file. A note, scanned from a sheet of paper, in my father's handwriting. 3 lines. I won't repeat all of it, but it ended like this. "I know what he's doing. I waited for you to see it yourself. Now you have everything you need to stop it. Just do it right. Not the way he does it." I sat there and read it again. Not the way he does it. My father hadn't just handed me a weapon. He'd handed me a condition. Don't sink to your brother's level. Don't make a scene. Don't throw the papers in his face. Don't hurt your mother just to make it hurt. Do it clean. By the rules. So that afterward you can still look at yourself in the mirror. I cried then. The first and last time in this whole story. Not from hurt. From the fact that my father, it turned out, had seen all of it. All those Sunday dinners where he looked away. All his silence at those board meetings. It wasn't weakness. He was collecting. He was waiting. He couldn't move against his son out in the open, but he could give his daughter everything she needed to stand on her own. And the pressure, meanwhile, kept building. It was already known a restructuring was coming. You can't keep a thing like that quiet in a company. And my mother went out into the open. She called me Wednesday evening and talked for 40 minutes. That I needed to understand my brother, that this is hard on Kyle right now, that in a family you stick together, you don't pull the blanket to your own side. I listened and counted how many times she'd say the word brother and not once say the word fair. I counted 14. Mom, I finally said, did you ask even once what actually happened? She caught herself. And then she gave me the thing that made me understand it was pointless to talk. Dara, it doesn't matter what happened. What matters is that the family stays whole. You're strong, you'll get through it. Kyle won't survive the shame. There it is. I'm strong, so I'm fair game. I can be written off because I won't break. He can't because he will. In that arithmetic, my decency wasn't a virtue. It was a resource that was convenient to spend. I didn't argue. I just said, "Good night, Mom," and hung up. And in that second, the last thread of guilt that still twitched in me snapped. I didn't owe them anything anymore. I opened the laptop and started making a list. What I had, what I was missing, and who to go to turn 18% and one flash drive into something the conference room wouldn't be able to ignore. First on the list was the word that started it all. Audit. Audit. A simple word, and behind it was my whole strategy. Because I could have walked into that board meeting and screamed, "He set me up, here's the thread." And then what? Kyle would say it was taken out of context. My mother would say I was out for revenge. Papers without an independent review are just my word against his. And his word, in this family, always weighed more than mine. I didn't need a word. I needed a finding. Dry, on letterhead, signed by someone the board would have to believe, because he wasn't me, wasn't Kyle, wasn't Dad. A stranger. Impartial. Someone who couldn't be accused of settling family scores. But first I didn't go to an auditor. I went to a lawyer. Not our corporate one. Ours was on Kyle's payroll and would have slept curled up next to him. I found an outside one, corporate law, paid out of my own pocket, and laid two things in front of him: Severn's bylaws and the ownership structure. And I asked one question: what can I actually do with my 18%? He read the bylaws for about 40 minutes. I sat and waited, and those were the longest 40 minutes of my life. Then he took off his glasses and said the thing that made something inside me straighten up. You have quite a few rights you've apparently never once used. He was right. I'd never really read them. When everything's fine in a family for 30 years, you don't open the bylaws. You trust. The shares felt like a piece of paper about being related, not a tool. I learned they were a weapon only when someone raised it against me first. Here's what it turned out to be. Under the bylaws, a shareholder with 10% or more can demand a special general meeting be called. I had 18. I could call a meeting myself, without asking Kyle. Next, the question of removing the sole executive, the CEO, is decided by the meeting. And for that decision, it isn't only the family shareholders who matter. There was also the investment fund with its stake, the same Gromoff and the woman from out east. They stayed neutral exactly as long as the company's numbers suited them. And the numbers, thanks to Kyle, were starting not to. The lawyer explained a simple thing to me that I'd somehow never put together in all my years at the company. In a family, seniority decides. On a board, arithmetic decides. And the arithmetic wasn't on Charm's side. It was on the side of whoever brought proof to the table that the company was losing money under current leadership. I walked out of his office with a clear head. The plan wasn't a threat anymore. It was a staircase, step by step. Step 1, an independent audit. Not all of it. There was no time and no money for that. Targeted, a few large deals over 2 years, including Techline. I wanted an outside person to pull the documents and just say what they showed. Who made the decisions that led to the losses? Where promises didn't match what production could do. No emotion from me, only what the numbers said. Step 2, build my own archive so it would lie down next to the audit and back it up. The emails with dates, the minutes from that negotiation, the photo of the handwritten sheet with the 3 points you can't promise, the same sheet Kyle ignored, and the email copy of those same points on a server. My old warnings about timeline risk, all of it in order, all of it filed, so that anyone opening the folder could walk the events step by step and reach the conclusion on their own. I wasn't going to accuse. I was going to show and let people draw the conclusion themselves. Step 3, my father, the most delicate part. He'd given me the flash drive, but he couldn't go against Kyle in the open. That was his son, and standing up at a meeting to vote against him would mean tearing something inside himself. I had no right to ask him to do that out loud. But I knew. If an independent finding was on the table, if the arithmetic added up, he wouldn't have to choose between his children. He'd only have to choose the truth. And the truth he'd chosen his whole life. He was the one who taught it to me. I made a schedule. Until the special meeting I had the right to call, it came out to about 3 weeks. 10 days for the auditor to work. The rest for my archive, and the legal paperwork for the demand to convene. And then the thing happened that I hadn't built into the plan. They fired me early. Kyle must have sensed something. Maybe the lawyer knew someone who knew us. Maybe it was just the instinct of a cornered animal. He didn't wait. He pushed that restructuring through at the next regular board meeting, the very one I opened this whole story with. He thought that by throwing me out of the operations chair, he'd cut the ground out from under me. He didn't know one thing. You can fire a chief operating officer. You cannot strip a shareholder of her 18% and her right to call a meeting. He took my title. The weapon stayed in my hands. I signed the termination notice on a Friday. And Monday morning, I sent the formal demand to convene a special general meeting of shareholders, with one item on the agenda: the early removal of the chief executive officer. The clock started. 10 days. 10 days. I laid them out by the hour, the way I used to lay out shifts on the production floor. I found the auditor through the lawyer, a small independent firm, no ties to our family, which was the point. I gave them what I had the right to give as a shareholder: financial records on several large deals over 2 years. I set the task narrow and dry, not find dirt on my brother, but pull these deals, look at where the decisions that led to losses were made and who made them. Just follow the paper. I knew that if you went at it honestly, the paper would lead where it needed to on its own. I didn't need to tilt anything. I only needed to not get in the way of the truth showing itself. And that's when I really understood what my father's words had meant. Keep every letter. When the auditors started requesting documents, a simple thing came to light. Kyle didn't have much. Or rather, he had what he showed. The clean, convenient version. But the source documents, the drafts, the early versions, the emails where you can see how decisions were actually made, those he didn't have. He lived on presentations. And a presentation doesn't show who got it wrong. It shows how to make it look good. And I had all of it. I'd kept everything my whole life. Not out of strategy, out of character. Every email, every approval chain, every set of minutes, every memo. Folders by year, by project, by client. Andrew always joked that I had an archive like a notary's. I didn't really understand why myself. I just couldn't throw out a document with a date and a signature on it. And now, 15 years of that archive lay on the table in front of me, and I finally heard what my father had said by that dark window 6 months earlier. He wasn't getting old back then. He was warning me. He knew how Kyle worked, knew that sooner or later his son would try to rewrite the story after the fact. And the only thing that protects you from a man who rewrites the story is a document written at the right time. My father couldn't say it straight. Your brother will set you up. That was his son. He said the one thing he could say without betraying anyone. Keep every letter. And then he left, and let me think he was just getting old. I sat over the folders and said quietly, out loud, "Thank you, Dad." Even though he couldn't hear me. My archive and the audit lined up perfectly. Where the auditors had a dry, the decision on delivery terms was made at the final negotiation, representative being the chief executive. I had the minutes of that negotiation and my email from a month before it, where I'd warned in plain words about the timeline risks, where the audit recorded a discrepancy between promised terms and production capacity. I had the photo of that handwritten sheet. The 3 points you can't promise, underlined twice. And next to it, the email of those same 3 points, sent to Kyle, sitting on a server with a date no one could touch. That was the piece that couldn't be drawn up after the fact. Paper to paper, date to date. No shouting. Just a timeline where each step was set up by the one before it, and from which anyone on the outside would draw the same conclusion. And then Kyle caught the scent. You can't quietly request an audit from the contracts department in a company. Sooner or later, it gets around. And 4 days before the meeting, my mother called. But now her voice was different. Not coaxing, frightened. Dara? Dara, what are you doing? Do you want to destroy your brother? I want the board to see the truth, Mom. Those are different things. Do you understand what this will do to your father? To the family? You'll tear everything apart. I didn't tear it apart. I spoke calmly, and the calm seemed to scare her even more. I just stopped holding together something that cracked a long time ago. She started to cry, said I was cruel, that I'd always been cold, that Kyle may have slipped, but he was my brother, and I was obligated to cover for him because that's how family works. And then she said the line I remember word for word, because the whole of our family was in it. If you do this, you can forget you have a mother. I was quiet for maybe 10 seconds. Then I answered, Mom, when they were crossing me out, you never once said, you can forget you have a son. You said it only now. To me. And I hung up. My hands didn't shake. I was just very tired. That evening, Andrew found me in the kitchen. I wasn't crying, just sitting. He sat down next to me and didn't ask what happened. He asked what he always asks. What do you want? To see it through, I said. Tomorrow, I give the auditors the last of it. The day after, the finding is ready. And in 3 days, the meeting. He nodded, and he said one thing I carried with me into that conference room. Then go and be precise. Not angry. Precise. That's exactly what I did. I got there at 7:40, out of habit. Before everyone, like all those years. Only now I didn't have an office, so I just sat in the car in the parking lot, a folder on my lap, watching the others pull in. I didn't get coffee this time. I wanted a clear head, no bitterness on my tongue. The meeting was set for 10, the same conference room. I'd walked into it 1,000 times, never the way I walked in this time. My father was already at the head of the table, chairman. Straight back, hands in a steeple. He raised his eyes to me when I came in, and I couldn't read his look, and that pulled everything in me tight. My mother sat next to Kyle, not me, and stared at the table. Kyle in a perfect shirt, same smile, but I could see it. The smile was running on willpower, not confidence. Gromov and the woman from the fund, the same ones who'd been there when I was fired. Neutral. Today, their neutrality decided everything. I sat, not across from Kyle, not off to the side, in my usual seat. I set the folder in front of me, without opening it. My father called the meeting to order, read out the agenda. One item: the early removal of the chief executive officer. His voice didn't waver, but I knew what it cost him to read that out loud about his own son. Kyle asked to speak first. He was good, I'll give him that. He talked about a family conflict my sister is trying to turn into a corporate one, about the resentment of a fired employee, about how emotion is a poor advisor in business. He never once raised his voice. He smiled. He almost pitied me out loud. A year ago, it would have worked. My mother nodded. I watched Gromov. He wasn't nodding. He was waiting for numbers. Then I took the floor. I didn't answer Kyle. That was the trap. The second I started defending myself, the whole thing would turn into a brother versus sister squabble, where whoever's louder wins. Andrew said, "Be precise, not angry." My father said, "Not the way he does it." I held both of those like two handrails. "I'm not going to talk about my relationship with my brother," I said. "It's no one's business in this room, and it's not relevant. I'm a shareholder. I hold 18%. And I called this meeting not as someone who was hurt, but as a co-owner who can see the company losing money. I asked an independent firm to pull several large deals over 2 years. I didn't give them any conclusions. I only asked them to follow the documents. The finding is on the table in front of you, and I want it read out. Not by me and not by my brother, but by the person who wrote it." I nodded, and the auditor was shown in. A dry man in gray, with no interest in our family drama. It made no difference to him whose son was whose. He opened the finding and began to read. He read evenly, point by point, about the Techline contract, about how, in the final negotiation, commitments on timeline and price were made that did not match the production capacity of the plant. And that discrepancy, I'm quoting, should have been obvious to the person holding the operational information. About how the decision was made by the chief executive personally. He named the figures. 347 million in a contract that never happened. Losses on 2 other deals where the same scheme repeated. Promise the impossible, then look for someone lower down to blame. And then he said the main thing. The thing it had all been for. That the review had in its possession correspondence and source documents, dated before these deals, showing that the risks had been flagged in advance. In writing. By the chief operating officer. By me. That the company had been warned, and that the warning was ignored. I opened my folder only at that moment. I took out the photo of the handwritten sheet. The 3 points you can't promise. Underlined twice, with a date. And I set it on the table to be passed around. Without a word. I'd written them by hand 6 months ago. Let them read it now. Kyle tried. He said the sheet could have been drawn up after the fact, that a photo proves nothing. And here's where it didn't save him. The auditor answered calmly that the sheet was only one illustration, not the whole chain. That in the materials there was an email of those same 3 points, sent to the chief executive's corporate address, with a date logged by the server, a month before the deal. And that it was the email, not the photo, that the conclusion rested on. He wasn't defending me. He was defending the facts. That was even better. The room went very quiet, the kind of quiet that's louder than any shout. Gromov took off his glasses, looked at Kyle for a long moment, without anger, the way you look at a bad investment, and he said one word to the fund. We vote. After that, it was arithmetic, the same arithmetic the lawyer had told me about. In a family, seniority decides. On a board, the percentages do. The fund voted to remove the director. They had no stake in the family, only in the money. And the money said one thing. I voted yes. My mother voted no, without lifting her eyes. Kyle's 22%. No, of course. That left my father. 25%. Chairman. The one who'd stayed silent at every Sunday dinner. The one who handed me the flash drive and wrote, "Not the way he does it." He didn't rush. He folded his hands into a steeple. The last time I'd seen that was when he was studying them while I was being fired. Only now he wasn't hiding his eyes in them. He lifted his head, looked at his son, a long look, and there was more pain in it than in everything my mother had said to me over those weeks. Then he turned his eyes to me. And I understood he wasn't choosing between his children. He was choosing the thing he'd taught me himself at 15, pointing at the two columns. That if the right side is bigger than the left, you have to admit it, no matter how much it hurts. Yes, my father said. One word. Quiet. But everyone heard it. Kyle was removed. In the same seat, at the same table, where a month earlier he'd removed me. I didn't gloat. There was no triumph. None of that movie moment where the heroine stands up and says something for effect. I just sat and watched my brother gather his papers, those same beautiful presentations that, for the first time in his life, got him nothing. His face was lost, like a man who'd spent his whole life believing charm was strength and had just learned it wasn't. And my mother. For that whole last hour, my mother hadn't said a single word. The same mother who used to spend 40 minutes explaining to me how I was supposed to feel. Who'd promised I could forget I had a mother. She sat in silence now, looking from one of her children to the other, and for the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. And somehow, that silence of hers hit me harder than the whole meeting. People think stories like this end at the moment of winning, that you walk out of the room and that's it. Credits, music, justice served. The truth is, the strangest part starts afterward. When everyone who voted for you goes home and you're left alone with your win, and it turns out it has a price. Let me tell you what happened to each of them. No gloating, just how it was. Kyle left the company entirely. He wasn't pushed out. He just couldn't stay where everyone had watched the crown come off. He sold his 22%. Who to I don't know. We don't talk. Sometimes I hear about him through mutual acquaintances. He started some kind of consulting thing, posts online about leadership and how important it is to stay true to yourself. I don't hate him anymore. You know, when you see a person all the way through, you understand he's not a villain. He just spent his whole life confusing looking strong with being strong. And in our family, they backed him in that his whole life. My mother didn't speak to me for 6 months. That line, "You can forget you have a mother," hung between us, and there was no taking it back. And then, on Lisa's birthday, she showed up. No call, with a cake, like nothing had happened. We didn't hash anything out. We just drank tea. And for the first time in my adult life, she asked not about Kyle, but about me. How I was, how work was. I didn't throw my arms around her neck. Something between us cracked for good, and we both know it. But at least she stopped pretending I was the guilty one. For our family, believe me, that's a revolution. My father. With him, it's complicated and simple at the same time. We never, not once, said out loud what happened. Not about the flash drive, not about the note, not about that word yes that cost him a son. Once I tried to say, "Thank you," and he just waved it off and turned the conversation to production. But a week after the meeting, he called me into his office, set papers in front of me, the way he had when I was 30, and said, "Sign. You're taking over the company." I became chief executive of Severn. Not because I was the founder's daughter, because I was the only one who, all those years, knew how the whole thing held together. And me. For a long time, I couldn't get used to the quiet, to not having to prove anything anymore. You see, when you've been trampled for a long time, the fighting becomes your background, your air. And when it suddenly ends, at first you don't know how to breathe. Those first weeks, I kept catching myself bracing in the morning for a blow that wasn't coming anymore. Now, the thing I told you all of this for. Not to brag about how I got my brother. For one thing, I understood too late, and that I want you to understand sooner than I did. For more than 20 years, I was trained to believe that in a family you endure, that if you're the strong one, then you're the one they ride, and you stay quiet, because you'll get through it, and he won't. That a boundary you set with your own people is a betrayal, and I believed it. For so many years, I swallowed it, gave, covered, because I was afraid of being the one who broke the family. So here it is. The family isn't broken by the one who finally says enough. T. He family is broken by the one who, for years, makes that enough inevitable. I didn't break anything at that meeting. I just stopped holding together, with my own two hands, something that had rotted a long time ago. And if you're listening to me right now and you recognize your own family, your brother, your mother, your Sunday table where they carefully make you the guilty one, I want you to know one thing. You don't owe anyone your own dignity. You can love people and still not let them wipe their feet on you. You can set a boundary and not turn into the person who hurt you. My father wrote me 3 words. Not the way he does it. And the whole truth was in them. You can win clean. Without shouting, without revenge, without sinking to their level. Just by staying precise. And staying yourself. I still keep every letter. The habit stayed. Only now I know what for. And I still keep that first box. The corrugated cardboard one. Ordinary. The one my father brought to the kitchen when I was 13. It sits in my office, the chief executive's office, on a shelf. Empty. My mother once said, "Victor, it's a box." And he said, "It's a beginning." He was right about that too. The beginning just turned out a little different from what everyone expected.